Yeah, warm welcome to all of you. And, it's important that we talk about the brass tacks. Very often we routinely hear people saying that people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses. So what is it that keeps them, involved with the company, its goals, its objectives? I would like to open the whole talk with you, Mr. Sriram. What is it that really, what's the magic glue?
I have some bullet points because I'm very conscious about the time. And I'll go through some of the bullet points which I have. One is, I think, engagement means people using their discretionary time. And when you use your discretionary time, when do you get the time? You get the time either after office hours or during office hours, or you stretch the office hours. So if people are going to discuss, this is just an idea, if people are going to discuss company goals and company mission with their family, with their wives, with their husbands, with even their children, it could be one way of engaging employees better with the goals and so on. Second is empowerment. I think what we enjoy in Larsen & Toubro is a huge amount of empowerment at all levels. And I do feel that that is an extremely good step in engagement of employees with the goals of the company and the mission of the company. The third is, I think that, and this is, I resonate with what the write-up on Netflix talks about. You may have chief happiness officers, you may have engagement officers, etc. Finally, your ability to engage your people is going to be dependent on the performance of the company. They're not going to be engaged unless the performance of the company is good. Fourthly, I think it's important, and many companies have done that, including ours, to go into the concept of a fractal organization. If you have fractions of the goals and the mission, then it's more easily understood. If it's one big mission statement which is supposed to be common for all, it's very difficult for everybody to understand. Also, the point of engagement is very important to, it's very important to decide what levels of engagement are we talking about. For example, it's important to see whether your own leadership team is completely engaged. And if your leadership team is not completely engaged, then it's difficult to have the people down the line to be engaged. Then there are lots of other things. You can use ESOPs as a tool for creating a sense of ownership. You can link up rewards with your mission statements and so on. I think it's very important to treat employees like owners and have them involved in the process of making that, the goals and mission of the company, which means a bottom-up process is much more interesting. And I think, just to provoke a little bit of debate in the panel, I'll say companies where you don't have promoters or you have non-promoter driven companies, perhaps a more egalitarian participative approach is possible, and maybe a bottom-up approach is more possible. I also think that building iconic structures together, whether you build a great flyover, a great bridge, a great hospital, a stadia, or an offshore platform, everybody doing it together is excellent. One very disturbing study which I recently came across in the field of engagement was a survey done by Baines. And they said that if N is the president, as you go down, N-1, N-2, N-3, N-4, N-5, 6, 7 are completely disengaged. Most of them are very, very disengaged. Of course, it's even worse if your N-1 and N-2 is disengaged. But normally the line of sight, as it goes away from the top, it becomes more and more difficult to engage, especially when there are multiple layers and you have tall hierarchies and you have very bureaucratic structures. And therefore, transparency in the organization, building a culture in the organization where you don't just leave it to wishful thinking and you say, need to know is more important than nice to know, and keep things to your chest. That's very, very important in terms of culture. So I'll come back after a while.
That's a lot of thoughts that you've thrown at us. You made my job very easy. But I would like to bring you in at this point. You were saying that it's important to sort of, a lot of people don't understand what is talent about. Talent is both, they are both investors and shareholders. Was that what you said, Madhya?
I was reading a very beautiful piece this morning, and it says, हर शख्स यहाँ दौड़ता है भीड़ की तरफ और ये भी चाहता है कि उसे रास्ता भी मिले. We all tend to run in the same direction where we see the crowds and at the same time want to find our road from amongst the crowd, which is always going to be very difficult. One of the fundamental errors I see people talking about, and if you talk about engagement programs of all the companies, if you were to blindfold yourself and remove the masthead of the company brand on the top, you will find 75 to 80% of the engagement programs of all companies practically sounding similar. You will get confused. The question is very simple, that we do not bespoke, we do not customize our engagement programs on the basis of what the talent requirement of your enterprise is in the particular segment of business that you're operating. But before we get to that, one of the fundamental errors that I see in the marketplace happening is the appreciation of the characteristic of what talent is about. Talent is duple, paradoxically duple. Number one, it is an investor on the one hand, and at the same paradoxical end, it continues to be a resource on the other end. So whilst on the one hand, talent looks upon itself, each one of us who is a talent in an enterprise has a window of 20 to 25 years in the talent market, the labor market for which you want to create value for yourself. Now, you are investing a certain period of your time into an enterprise, and like a critical investor, you are on the one hand trying to understand, how do I get the best return out of my time invested in a particular enterprise? So on the one hand, talent is an investor who is constantly looking at return on talent investment invested by him. On the other contradictory end, it is the same person who is going to be a value creator for the enterprise, and therefore the organization is trying to see that if I am paying him a certain X value, how do I extract the maximum out of him, the purpose for which I have recruited him in the enterprise. So if you understand the paradoxical duplicity of the characteristic of talent, you will be able to then decide on your engagement program. The second important characteristic of talent which people miss out, that on the one hand, people hate change, therefore talent hates change. On the other hand, contradictory hand, talent is in perpetual search for meaning for the time invested in you. So there is a perpetual search for meaning, perpetual search for change, perpetual search for wanting to do self-actualizing things in your career, whilst on the other hand, characteristically, people hate change. Now the question is, if you understand what drives people in the duple characteristic, what will drive them to not change when you give them meaningful engagement, association with your enterprise, that is very important. And the third greatest blunder that most corporates tend to do is they think that potted plants make a garden. Potted plants can never make a garden. If you have an empty plot of land and suddenly overnight you bring in some 100 pots of flowering plants inside and you try to organize it and you want to believe that's a garden, it is not going to be a garden that's going to be there at all. Tomorrow morning you can have all the 100 pots out and there is no garden. So if you are trying to look at your management practices only in terms of some best practices that you pick up as you hear about these kind of presentations and say, okay, fine, this organization has succeeded because it is this best practice, so let me take an assortment of best practices from different organizations and bring it into my company and believe that that's an engagement program, I promise you, you're not going to succeed. And 100 attempts to create engagement to this kind of best practices will never succeed. Unless and until you understand your requirement, unless and until you understand the soil of your organization, the culture of your organization, good mangoes are output of good farming. You need to understand the soil of your enterprise. You need to understand the need of your enterprise. You need to identify the correct practices of your enterprise, and only then you will be able to create the engagement that you're looking out for. So that's the kind of three duplicities in talent understanding in the market, which I thought I'll throw open to you.
That's interesting. I can smell the soil, I can feel it, and you've broken it from a concept, from something that gets bandied about all the time, to what it boils down to, which he also referred to. You know, it's interesting that you raised the point about what people do with their time, you know, whether at work or when they are outside of work. You brought in that personal factor. You brought in the whole bit about people, wanting a change and yet not liking the change, and how you have to bring it down, break it down to what it means to them. What has been, your experience of it, Mr. Agarwal?
To me, engagement is actually a very simple concept. As a human being, whether you are in India or anywhere in the world, regardless to the hierarchy where you are operating from, you're basically wanting to work in a place where what you have in terms of your aspiration is aligned to the organization that you're working for. You want to make sure that you're respected for your capability, respected for your basic human dignity. You have an elbow room to do what you believe you can do competently. The third is that you're recognized, you're rewarded when the job is done well, and there is an opportunity to learn and grow. So these are the basic needs of any person working in any enterprise, anywhere in the world at any levels. What makes it complex is that we forget this simple thing, and we get lost into very highfalutin, sometimes, very clever terminology and complex processes. And in the end, you wonder, how are we delivering these basic things to the individual? And if we succeed in delivering that, then you find people are engaged. We measure engagement right across RPG companies. We have found invariably the engagement is scored to be very high at 70 to 84% level. And then once one of the external jury member reminded us that you're measuring engagement level of only managers. What about non-managers? What proportion of your people are managers? 10%. Only 4,000 out of 40,000 people are managers. And they asked me, what about the balance 36,000 people? That really woke us up, that we were not measuring engagement of the rank and file at the workforce level. And then we began to do that. We began to do that only over the last 3 years. And we found we were at a varying level, somewhere at 50%, 60%, 70%. And we began to work toward raising it high. And now in our factories, we find them to be as high as 84, 85%. So while there might be still a union management discussion, there might be some very heated disagreements, but in the end, there is an involvement, there is an engagement. And you don't have to just leave it to a chance of a manager and the manager's particular style or the goodness of the worker who is working. You have to architect that. And as an HR professional, what are your variables? You can put that in your policy, you can put that in your processes, you can put that into your programs. And we have tried, for example, self-managed team. In all our new factories, which are in Baroda, workers are trained right up front how to plan, organize, and monitor their own work because they're capable, provided you give them the opportunity. So we are not micromanaging them. There's no supervisor or manager who is actually telling them what is your work today, how well you're doing it. They're self-managed. And great productivity, great production, skill building, engagement level is very high. So you have to architect that. You cannot just leave it to a chance when you are running a large enterprise. And I think as HR professionals, we need to ask what we are doing in terms of architecture of the workplace, which fosters engagement of people at various levels.
Shamini, I want to be an agent provocator, and sorry, I'm disturbing the flow of your process.
Right.
There is a greatest myth that HR managers have perpetuated, and I'm party to that in a way, is that your engagement score is determinant of your business success and productivity. There is a Rockefeller study done which very clearly indicates that there is no one-to-one relationship between the engagement score in an enterprise and its business success or its profitability, because they found that there were successful companies where engagement scores were very low. There were successful companies where engagement score was very high. There were failing companies where engagement scores were very high, and there were failing companies where engagement score was very low. Therefore, the perpetuity of the myth that we have created, and let's keep it within the room, and I hope it doesn't get televised or written in print, is to say that really the entire force of engagement that we put into the organization, trying to tell our operating managers that it will lead to better productivity, better results, better profitability, is not an established relationship. It is still a hypothesis which we are perpetuating.
So what do you do about keeping, Sumit, if you will, you like to take that on, and how do you keep employees engaged, given that there's no really business connect between how employees are engaged and how a company performs necessarily? Will you like to take that on?
I sort of, have a slightly different take from Adil on this, and it all depends on how you define engagement. The way I look at engagement is how does an employee create value for himself and the organization. So the moment you start taking that lens, then it's not about attrition. Of course, attrition is important, and the fact that you have people who are delivering value, who stay with you, is a very important metric. But if we start with the value creation lens, then the question in my mind is, what is value creation? Is there a shared understanding of that value creation between the organization and an employee? And when I talk about shared understanding, we often see that the understanding must be both long-term and short-term. So if we just, talk about goals, which is, the topic of today's discussion, and start cascading quarterly goals and annual goals, then the relationship is very transactional. The moment we start talking about a larger objective, and obviously break it down to sort of milestones and goals, and then sort of tell the employee what's in it for him or her. I think if we are able to sort of align these two, and there's consistency of this alignment, you will see, and I believe you will see, engaged organizations and engaged employees. The second, point which I want to make is we in HR often take this mandate of engagement as an HR tool. And to me, I think HR has a very important role to play because I think we are at the forefront of policy decisions, infrastructure, and a lot of other variables which drive engagement. But a large part of what engagement is driven by is the manager. And you started off by the discussion by saying that employees leave managers, which in a large part is true. So in Godrej, for example, we measure engagement every 18 months, and we do a structured model. I agree with Adil, in one point saying that in some part of the businesses where we see business performance not being very, let's say, consistently high, we do see high levels of engagement. But over a period of time, when you sort of look at those businesses, it invariably is a lead indicator of performance not being in the same level. And the point is, how do managers play a role, and can you isolate pockets and create and isolate where engagement issues are? The last point which I want to make is around engagement being generalized at an organization level. And we often say that organization X is engaged. But let's look at what makes an organization, and those are employees and thousands of employees. And those employees have their own preferences. So the question for us is, how do you create a fabric where the organization stands for something which touches employees across different demographics and levels, but yet how are we able to create programs which are specific to some demographics? And we talked about Gen Y and let's say the Gen X. The preferences are very different. So for example, when we start looking at our engagement scores for people who are above 40, 45, apart from a lot of common variables, they're very interested in health, retirement, long-term security, etc. When you start looking at Gen Ys and millenniums, they are very interested in flexi time. How do they contribute to the society? What's happening around the world? How can they sort of move roles every 2 years? So you can't have a common program which addresses everything. So the organization must stand for a common fabric, but yet customize its program as we go ahead.
Can I just supplement particularly to the point which Adil raised, provocative as it was.
Shamni told me at the beginning that was my role.
I see. Okay, you're playing it well then. So I agree with Adil's first part of the equation. That is that even if company is not doing well, you could have very high level of engagement score. And when you said that, I remembered the highest score in RPG group is earned by a company, by a factory in Silvassa in Gujarat. That's always last 5 years consistently above 90%. and it belongs to a business which is not making money. So that's one side of it. Secondly, you know, if you look at the total equation of engagement.
So did it make you wonder? Did you?
Yes, sure. We looked at it, and that's what I was coming to, that engagement is an equation. And when we talk about what we do, it's one part of the equation. There is a second part of the equation is what is the aspiration of the people who are involved in that situation. So that is where expectation level plays a role. So if the expectation level is at a certain level, you might get a very high score for doing very little. While at another place, expectation level may be very high, and then no matter how much you're doing, you may still get a low score. And oftentimes we misjudge the expectation level of people. So as an HR professional, when you're looking at engagement, you have to equally look at who you are trying to engage. Right. What is the aspiration of that individual? So you can't do just one thing across everywhere.
Yeah.
You have to really segment it and then custom build the program.
Absolutely. So Darshan, I come to you for the reality check. What is it that you
So I think the panelists are probably making the assumption that better engagement leads to better retention. Is that something which we're talking about? So okay, what is engagement? What is the end game for engagement? You want better output from your people. So then I think the organizations have to sit down and ask a question saying that, okay, is better retention leading to better performance? Because what happens when there is 100% retention? Then it becomes a bit of a cozy club. You don't want organizations which have got managers who work for 20 years and 25 years and 30 years who've been one organization, individuals who've worked only in one organization. What that leads to is perhaps you will get into a frog in a well kind of a syndrome in the organization. Then it actually, in my opinion, it stunts external ideas, it stunts new thought processes. And in business, what's also important is that if there isn't growth, growth is a very, very critical catalyst for engaging people and retaining talent. So if the growth doesn't happen, then again, it's difficult to engage and retain people. That is one. Second, if growth happens, if generally there is a secular growth across the marketplace, then retention is going to be a problem because there are other companies who are going to seek out your talent, your people. So there again, how do you then keep your stars or keep your performers in the organization? So the third question is that the organization itself would like to ask that, if you've served the company for many years, what is the motivation? What is driving you? Are you able to bring in a fresh perspective every day to the job or every year? Or are you getting renewed on the job? Because what happens today is that, when people are not waiting till the time they retire to sort of metaphorically settle down in their lives. By the time the way the last 15 years compensation levels have gone up, people are fairly well settled, well healed by the time they are in the mid-40s. If they've grown well in their career, then done well, then their priorities in life, it changes. For example, I was talking to a very senior executive in the technology sector. So he was talking about one of his managers, the CEOs of the business. In the last 5 years, his focus is more on building real estate assets rather than focusing on going and staying in where the market is. Because today most of the frontline technology company managers are sitting in the United States or sitting in Europe or sitting where the market is. So when priorities change, again, then the engagement is of no importance and retention is of no importance because then, there has to be some checks and measures in terms of how do you handle the situation.
Right.
So too much retention is probably not a good thing.
I wanted to ask you, there was an interesting thing you mentioned about fractal, is that the expression you use about fractal objective?
Fractal organization. What I meant is organizations which are, we are getting into a structure where we have 12 independent companies and one of them has already got subsidized and the next step is to, do an IPO and list it in the market. So you have a clear structure of an independent company, a strategic business group, and then you have BUs. So the line of sight, because the topic is about engagement with goals and vision of the company. And of course, we now got into engagement, about which I want to speak a little bit, but I think it's easier if you have fractal organization where the organization is smaller and the line of sight is better. But I have a few points on what my fellow panelists have said, with your permission. Firstly, I think innovative organizations are definitely have, in my view, have much more engagement. Imagine a company which has made bucky paper. It's supposed to be 1 upon 100 of the thickness of paper and 100 times the strength of steel, or metamaterials, you know. You paint a bottle with metamaterial and it has a negative refractive index, so it becomes invisible. So companies which are, you know, into additive manufacturing, extremely innovative in what they're doing. Therefore, I would like to believe that a company which says it's all about Imagineering, and I just leave it to your guesswork about which company says that, would be high in innovation and also would be having reasonably high engagement levels. Second is, I want to build on what Arvind said. If you look at the lower levels in the organization, workman levels and so on, my insight is they're the happiest people. They're uncomplicated. If you do an engagement survey, they're possibly the happiest in the company. I don't know why. Maybe it's because hearts and minds are better engaged than hands and legs at that level. Third is, I think it's very important to note that, first of all, let's ask ourselves in the panel itself, are we engaged? Do we have moments in life when we're totally lost in the moment? Do we have a hobby when, you know, your wife is calling you, or your husband is calling you, and you just are lost? You're saying, I'll come after a few minutes. I'm still, you know, I need to complete that. You have to experience engagement yourself to really understand what is engagement. I also want to say that, without meaning any offense to some very, very large multinational companies, they do this thing called change management, you know, where every 2-3 years structures are changing, goals are changing, and everything is changing, and people themselves don't know why it's changing. So the sense of shifting sands is very, very difficult to relate with. And any amount of work is, you know, you'll find that you have a demotivated bunch of people because of, you know, this constant, too quick changing of goals and so on.
So you're saying that a company can be very innovative, but it is still very important for people to know what the organization is all about, have a line of sight, and be very clear.
I'm saying that if a company is innovative in culture, it gives a lot of elbow room, a lot of space to people. It recognizes them to do something different. And therefore, when you're doing something different and making a difference to your profession or to a project or to a product, etc., or you're making a smart meter, or you're doing something which is cutting edge, you feel completely lost in terms of, you know, your time, your space, and you're not worried about things like compensation and stuff. You're living the moment.
Right. And at the same time, you do mention that people feel very unsettled when the organization keeps bringing on change very often, which is something even Adil talked about, that, you know, people like consistency. At one level, they don't like change.
The topic says engagement of people with goals and mission of the company.
Right.
And I'm saying, if you keep changing that every 3 to 2 years, saying that, you know, this geography is cut off, that geography is added. Change management is great, and, you know, everybody talks about rapid change and so on, but too fast. Some of the, you know, transnational companies do it too fast, in my view, because they're worried about quarterly results. Then I think it's difficult for people down the line to relate with it.
Would you like to take that on, Adil? Because how do you manage when an organization is growing so rapidly? Probably objectives are changing, markets are changing, consumers are changing. How do you provide a healthy mix of this consistency and yet keep them aligned to what the company's goals and objectives are?
In fact, tempted once again to quote Fakir. He says, है शौक ए सफर ऐसा कि एक मुद्दत से हमने मंजिल भी नहीं पाई और रास्ता भी नहीं बना. We continue to do the same engagement process irrespective of whatever the challenges are, irrespective of whatever the context is, irrespective of what the situation is. Now, my disagreement with Yogi comes from the point that the economic markets are going to be challenging in the coming world. One of the greatest blunders I see entrepreneurs make or businesses make is to believe that the current volatility of the market is something that's going to pass away. So keep your head low, believe it's a kind of a tornado, save yourself for the next 3, 6, 8, 9 months, and then everything will become normal. Don't invest, don't do anything very rash, just keep yourself, save yourself, and you will be through with it. The reality is that this is going to be the character of the market for the coming years. It is a volatile market, it is an uncertain market, it is a complex market, it is an ambiguous market, it is a VUCA market. Now, VUCA market is a reality. Now, the question is, organizations will have to continue to create value. Organizations will have to therefore continue to find out that with this kind of challenging nature of the market, how are we going to engage our people and continue to create the value that we want. So neither the market character is going to change, nor is the need for engagement going to change, nor is the desire to create value going to change. How are you going to manage this trilogy of imbalances? The question is, I disagree that you need to be engaging with the goals of the enterprise. I think, and as an OD practitioner, this is my own learning, and I'm sharing my learning of around 3 decades of working in enterprise in the areas of OD, is that engagement is not to do with the goals of the enterprise, but engagement is to do with the value journey of your enterprise. And there are 5 elements of it. If you give me 2 minutes, I'll explain to you. Please. One is, how do you understand the value propositions of the employees, and how are you able to bespoke, customize these values that he is looking out for? How do you satisfy him? That is the source from where engagement is going to come. The second domain from where the value is going to come is, how do you create engagement with the value chain efficiency of your enterprise? Your value chain is not going to be the same when the markets are going to change. Your value chain is going to be changing. How do you engage your employees, not in superficial best practices, but how are you going to engage him in meaningful, impactful changes in the value chain, which is going to continue to create value? How do you engage him? How do you involve him? How do you get him the special assignments? How do you give him challenging projects? That is going to be engaging, not a set of some best practices you pick up from some American company. The third is, what is the direct linkage to the customer value satisfaction? Are you involving your employees in directly ensuring the changing needs of the customer in the challenging environment? And how do you involve your employees in satisfying those customer values? That is what is called engagement. Not some best practices which you pick up from some Harvard Business Review or some best practices sessions you hear and then you try to replicate it. That is not going to create value. The fourth is, how do you link him with the stakeholder value satisfaction? Are you doing CSR activities? How do you engage your employees through your foundation to ensure that they are involved in the satisfaction of the customer social responsibilities, employee social responsibilities, engagement in programs of that sort? And the last is that the value creation of the enterprise, which is giving return on capital employed for the investor, how do you involve your employees meaningfully where he sees value, that if I help my employer in creating value, he is in return going to create wealth for me. And that's where the entire duplicity of talent gets fulfilled. So don't engage your employees in meaningless practices here and there and believe that the fair. You see, engagement predominantly came into the domain of OD professionals more as a diagnostic tool, because you wanted to diagnose and find out what was happening. And therefore, engage them in the value creation journey and not just in the goals journey, because goals are going to constantly change. And the last mistake that I wanted to identify is, people mistake Hawthorne effect as engagement. Tremendous numbers of times, engagement scores go up due to short-term introduction of these best practices because of Hawthorne effect and not because of the real-time engagement that you have. And therefore, don't mistake that, otherwise you'll get wrong scores.
Okay. I just want to clarify one thing.
Yeah.
You know, VUCA has something called VUCA Premium. And if we're talking about goals, I'm just saying goals and mission must have a minimum shelf life. I'm not saying anything more than that. I'm saying that a mission should have at least a 3 years shelf life. If you keep changing it, people get confused. A structure may change, Your business strategy may change, your budgets may change, but your basic mission shouldn't change too fast. Your goal also should have a minimum shelf life, because if that keeps changing, any amount of communication mechanisms, town halls, social networking, cutting videos and sending it out and having webcasts, etc., will not be enough. You'll have a confused company. That's all I'm saying.
Would you like to?
I just want to sort of contrast two of our group companies and sort of an inside story. We just sort of did our engagement survey and got the results a week before. So there's company X, which actually showed low engagement. And when we started sort of looking at that, this is a company which has been sort of doing okay, growing as per the industry, very low attrition, almost negligible attrition, coming back to Sudarshan's sort of point. And yet, like when you look at engagement is low. So when we started dissecting it and started looking at, people say that compensation and engagement, what is the correlationships? And we saw that probably on compensation also we were much below what market was. So the question is that in an organization where engagement is low, people are not leaving, and yet like you're not paying the best, then will the company ever sort of turn around and do much more or realize its potential? The other contrast is another company which was bleeding, let's say, 3-4 years back. And we had a change of management, and this new guy came and said that, 3 years, you sail with us, one objective, we'll turn around the company. If you turn around the company, we are all going to be in it together. There's a bonus, and we have a sort of pretty robust bonus scheme where, value is shared with employees, and said that 3 years you may not get value, but if you sort of turn it around, then we will all make value. And today we are in the 5th year of journey, and that company which was bleeding today makes the highest amount of bonus in the group. The people are probably the most engaged. So it's not about where the situation is or what's the current situation of the organization. I think that it's all about what is the engagement and what's, in fact, what Yogi said, what's the medium-term vision at least through which we engage. And the moment we start looking at short-term, then it doesn't work because too much of change just creates too much of uncertainty.
Right. So would you like to share your thoughts on this about turbulence, stability, providing employees stability and...
Right. Certainly. I think engagement doesn't have a connect with the short-term goal or the long-term goals. But engagement has a very high connect with moments of truth. At the brass tacks level, how is the person treated by the manager? Typically, there may be 10 interactions during the day, maybe 5 interactions. In a virtual world, maybe it's over the telephone or emails. But in those moments of transaction, what is the kind of a respect that is delivered to the individual? What kind of value the individual experiences?
The company's goal, broader goals actually boils down to
those transactional,
specifics.
Every moment experience is exactly what in marketing people talk about, the customer engagement. It's the moments of truth. So again, a life of an employee, there are hundreds, millions of...
How have you sought to address that within your system?
So again, you have to have a DNA of an organization which is respecting individual, which is respecting the capability of the individual, giving that elbow room to do the things which he or she is wanting to do, create job which is exciting for the individual, which is aligned to own aspiration. So if you can architect all that, then you have an engaged employee. Goals will change because we are in a dynamic world. Comparative scenario, marketplace, economics, it's all changing. So that is going to happen anyway. So how do you bond people? You bond people by making sure that in moments of truth, the respect that you deliver is everlasting. What is actually destroying this fabric is equally important to understand.
Does that, at some level, let me, you talked about also, engagement down the rank and file, but what about the company goal? It has to be a mix of company goal as well as engagement. So are you at some level saying that it's important for the manager to keep sight of the company's goal and yet manage the people in his team or her team in a way that they are engaged?
Yes.
Is that what it boils down to?
Right, absolutely. So the goals there is a hierarchy of goals because there is a company goal, the CXO level translates that their levels, then it cascades down to the grassroots level as well. So obviously they have to be interconnected. But it's a question of how the change is being communicated, how the individual needs are being met in the moments of those changes. And if you are a sensitive person, then you will make sure that the individual is communicated in a manner that individual's own needs are factored in before those decisions are made.
I just want to play with those words a little bit. You may have a company goal, and just to challenge what my friend Sudarshan said, of lowering your attrition from 18% to 12%. According to me, that has absolutely no correlation with attrition, and engagement has no correlation at all. You may have actively disengaged people with 4% kind of an attrition.
Absolutely.
So it's absolutely negatively correlated in my view. And what is important is trying to see, even if there is that so-called Gen Y people who are accused of being there only for 3 years, in that short 3 years, can you psychologically tweak your own thinking to saying, this is a contract, in those 3 years, are they engaged or not? That's important.
No, so I want to now talk about engagement as well as the company's goals and objectives. So who carries the torch of actually seeing that those companies' objectives are met? Is it the manager who should keep sight of what the company's goals are and yet see that the team is engaged and their needs are fulfilled? Because what is coming to me loud and clear is that you have to manage people's needs first. And as you manage their needs, you have to keep sight of the goal. So,
a short sentence before Sudarshan comes in, because I butted in, I apologize. I think it's the leaders who are in the company. It's their responsibility to make sure that people are engaged with the goals and the mission of the company. Otherwise, you can't have an engaged workforce, and you won't have, you'll only have hands and legs. You won't have hearts and minds.
I just want to ask a question to either Mr. Agarwal or Adil or anyone who can take that. I just want to ask you, does better engagement within the organization make you a better employer from an, in terms of as an attractiveness as an employer, especially when you're looking to attract talent from outside? Yeah. What's the kind of impact it has on your employer brand?
Yeah.
See, number one, culture in an enterprise provides the enabling environment which forms the basis for the engagement. Now, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Whatever business goals, whatever business strategies you will have, culture will eat it away if the practices of your enterprise are not leading or not aligned to the goals you are having. And finally, it is the culture that wins. Therefore, if you create engagement, the chances of you meeting the goal is very high because it provides the enabling environment. Sometimes things happen even without the enabling environment, but generally, if there is a positive enabling environment, then the chances of success are very high. When you are trying to look at talent from outside, and what do people from outside know of your enterprise? They do homework, they understand your corporate brand, they try to find out from their friends about the organization. And one of the things that people talk about is the kind of culture of your organization, which is the basis on which people decide whether they want to join or not join. It is not the balance sheet that generally professionals from outside will see. Yes, they would see that, but it is generally the information on the culture of the enterprise that people would try to get onto before deciding whether they're joining or not.
Is it, I just want to, is it culture or also the opportunity in front of the organization? Because just from my own personal experience, many years ago we recruited for an emerging private sector bank, which is very large today by any standards. So, we looked at a number of potential candidates, say, from multinational banks and other multinational financial institutions, because we didn't have too many Indian companies, so to say, or that was the market. So when we looked at the biggest selling plank for us was the opportunity in front of the candidates, the canvas which is laid out to them, as opposed to the culture which they carried in a foreign bank, whereas the opportunity was restricted in a foreign bank from their own business standpoint, or also from the market restrictions which the sector had at that point in time.
You want to know the real answer as a recruiter, or you want me to tell you an answer for the audience?
I leave the decision to you.
So the real answer is like this. When the value proposition you have is not in line with the culture of the organization, and you know that the culture of the enterprise is not really all that very positive to be able to attract any guy of value or a professional from another enterprise of value to join your organization, the value proposition then you sell to the search firm or to the candidate is, we do not have it, and here is an opportunity that I'm providing for you to come into my enterprise and do that. So that's a great value proposition. I don't know how meaningful or not meaningful it is, because to be able to make a mega statement that I am asking you to change the enterprise culture all within an exposure of an assignment that I will give you is not an easy task. So therefore, these so-called challenges that we give to the candidates saying, we are not there, we don't have it, systems are not there, you join me as the HR guy, and you have to set these processes in place. It's a great story to tell when you do not have the right culture happening. Now, chances are, oftentimes, go back to the same candidates and find out they will be back in the market soon enough, realizing that it's not an easy task to take that opportunity and challenge.
So Darshan, if I may just, sorry. If I may just ask, answer this question also in the perspective that candidates are different kinds. You know, a person who will be interested in short-term opportunities and, you know, almost like a venture capital kind of a role would not be your candidate who will sustain with the organization going ahead. So ideally, if you have the mix of the right culture with the opportunity, I think that's what creates sustainable sort of relationships. I think just saying we have a great culture but no opportunity, or saying the vice versa, I don't think is a recipe for something which will sustain.
Sure. Sudarshan, people join organizations for all kinds of reasons. And you've been recruiters for a long period of time, so you know, and I know as well, some very senior executives would join an organization. They know that it's a bad organization from a work environment point of view, but money is good. They would say, yes, we will rough it out. In 2 years' time, at least I can buy a house in Bombay. All right. So notwithstanding those kind of outliers, which is not as outlying actually, because it's a common day occurrence which you must be experiencing as well. But coming back to the core of your question, that is engaged, a company with high engagement, is it an attractive place for people to join? And I would say that company with high engagement is an exciting place to join, because that's a place where I have an opportunity to do what I think I'm capable of doing. I will get an elbow room to do things. I will be recognized for doing things. I would have a great learning opportunity. So that's a terrific place for me to go and work.
I just want to add to what Arvind is saying. I think in happy places where people are engaged, happy not in the cliched sense of just being happy for the 9 to 5, but where you're really deeply engaged, people are in the company are great advocates. And when you have people speaking about your company, it becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think it's great to be speaking about your company. And the demonstration of that is, if you've had attrition in the last, say, 2 years, of say 9 people or 10 people leaving from a particular band, just try to call them up and ask them, do you miss the company? Would you like to come back? Especially the high performers. And I think if they give you the answer that, yes, we miss the company a lot, at least out of 9, if 2 come back, and I tried that experiment, it feels fantastic, because it feels that you have something solid in the form of culture, which is the cement that glues the entire company together.
So therefore, one final question before I throw the floor open for questions from the audience. They've been waiting to ask. Who has this onus of building this culture that takes into account the aspirations of the people, respects them, and yet keeps track of what the goalpost is?
Well, I think it's the top management team, not one individual. I'm choosing my words to say that it's the team. If the CXO team, they come together to say, this is the future of this enterprise we want to build, and this is the cultural fabric that we live by, then it actually will happen. Otherwise, one person may come and go, whether it's an HR person, whether it's a CEO, and it's not a sustainable strategy.
that, how will you build that culture of performance in the organization? Because I've seen often, whenever there is people say that it's very difficult to work with X manager and Y manager because he's round the clock, he's too demanding, and so on and so forth. So people do get uncomfortable in these kind of situations, and they
build on what Arvind said. I got a little confused. You asked a question about which Arvind answered, and I completely agree that it's top management which is responsible, and then I'll come to your question, Sudarshan. Just to add to that, Arvind, I think it's important that HR plays a very good role, a very strong role in the architecture of the how. I mean, the top management is, of course, responsible, but they need to know.
And they are also involved with their own needs and their own
and also there's a mechanism. There has to be a structured, just to use some HR mumbo-jumbo, they call it organization development. There has to be a structured way of actually cascading that entire message down, with I think HR can play a great role. And I think, Sudarshan, your question was on...
culture itself is
really necessary at all.
Is it overrated?
Yeah. Overrated
I don't think it's overrated. I think it's extremely important to have the right kind of culture to really contribute. And the answer to your question about is it overrated, if you have a culture of honest adult-like conversations, you asked about performance. Your question was around performance. So my point is, if you have a company with a culture where there's honest adult-like responsible conversations, and you're not shy and you don't beat around the bush about feedback, I think it can create a great, great amount of engagement in spite of being brutal with the truth.
Yeah. So I would like to now invite the audience to ask questions. I see several hands going up. Yeah.
Good evening. Good evening to one and all. When we look at the engagement, the standard practice is to templatize it. The typical template that comes into place is stay, say, and strive. And you build programs around that and ensure that you get good engagement score. Just before engagement survey is made, announce some goody programs and things like that. And then try and say that, yes, I got 90% score, I have got 70% score, and things like that. At the end of the day, if engagement is what we talk about, is marrying goals of the organization with that of the individual at the core. If that happens, automatically the guys get engaged. If that is so, each individual has different goals. So should we say that it should be a bottom-up approach for the engagement to understand what your employees at various levels want? And if it is so, is that not a daunting task?
Can I give a very simple answer? Part one of your question has a statement embedded that there's too much of obsession about data. And you bracket people into data and so on, and you forget about, you miss the wood for the trees. Absolutely correct. If you use too much of data and statistics, you miss the essence. It's important to understand the conversations. I think it's important really to understand what is the spirit of what is going on by having focus groups and so on, and trying to segment the population into different parts so that you get the real insights of what is it that is, what is the organization speak all about.
Good evening. This is Devashish from, I represent Aditya Birla Financial Services Group. First, let me congratulate the panel. It's really eye-opener discussion. I have a question, and this comes from a manager's perspective. We tell managers are responsible for the engagement. Now, our experience on year-on-year engagement scores is when you do action planning and you tell that, okay, this year the manager needs to do this for the score to go up. And in the second year, when that is achieved, that becomes a hygiene factor for the employees. Now, what are you expecting? Are you expecting the manager to be a god and every year the benchmark goes up and up? Where does it stop? I would like the insight of the panel. I throw this open to the panel to help me understand.
Can I respond to that? So that's true of everything in life. You think about yourself as a customer. As customers, our aspiration, expectations are rising by the day. We are not satisfied with what we were getting yesterday. Whether it's our laptop, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's the car, we want it different every day. So are the company's gods to be delivering that to the customers? It's the same about manager and employee. Yes, employee has a right to have a rising aspiration. You and I are also employees. Our aspirations also have risen. And somebody is, stretching themselves to make sure that our aspirations are met. So as a manager, yes, our responsibility is, if we are a manager, that we have to sense that rising aspiration of our people and find ways and means of delivering on that. There is no shying away from that.
I just want to build on that point. No offense meant to consultants, but those consultants who are involved in the business of measuring engagement are kind of built-in Cassandras. Cassandra is the Greek goddess who says everything is doomed. And I don't mean any criticism to them because they bring in huge value in terms of benchmarking of engagement scores of other companies and so on. But I think getting too carried away by those engagement scores and getting depressed, it can act as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, I have so many percentage of people are disengaged. And I also get disengaged looking at that score. I think it's important to dice the data very carefully and, as the friend there said, not to get too carried away by all the stats and the data.
I want to add on one thought to that. This growing need to do employer brand marketing then makes it necessary for enterprise to keep touting the engagement scores of the enterprise. So when you are doing your engagement benchmarking, are you doing it genuinely to determine the engagement of your people, or are you using to keep touting on your stationery what your engagement score is so that you can do your brand engagement and brand marketing with your potential employees that you are an employer of choice? That purpose, once you get your answer to, will answer your question in details.
Also, I think, looking at the trend of engagement improvement is more important than looking at absolutes. I think many people get carried away by looking at a particular year's score and getting depressed about it. In the last 3 years, even if it's low scores that have improved, incrementally it's great.
Yeah, any other question?
Hi, my name is Ramchandran. Longevity of today's manager on an average is 3 to 4 years in most organizations, right? So he's usually not concerned about long-term goals. How do we keep him engaged, at least on transactional goals? Though Mr. Agarwal touched upon this point very briefly, I would like to understand others' point of view on this.
I find it difficult to answer that question because I come from a company where the group executive chairman is about to finish 50 years in the company. And, most of our directors have all put in more than 25, 30 years. Some have even about to finish 40 years. So in Larsen & Toubro at least, the attrition is not disturbingly high. And also we find people who are reasonably engaged because they stay long. However, having said that, in some of our engineering centers, we do have attrition, and it is difficult to, retain people because of the competition for that kind of talent. As I said earlier, I think during the period they stay, keeping them engaged is more important rather than worrying about how long they stay. What is the quality of engagement during their stay? That's critical. If they want to go, let them go happily and become good ambassadors of you and not badmouth you. If you've done that, you've achieved a lot.
I think the art in engagement and retention is keep your people useful for your organization while making them useless for the outside or other organizations. So, which is also, because when we are looking at senior executives, if you look at somebody who has worked in a company for 20 years or 25 years, we know that it's extremely difficult to dislodge the individual. One is that, the fact is is absolutely emotionally connected to the organization. To them, even thinking of a change is somewhat like almost like a sin in their organization. So that's one. So because emotional bonding is absolutely critical in the Indian context. So that works very well for organizations when you're talking about engagement. And second, when you look at, these are, I'm talking from as an executive search consultant, these are risky candidates because these are the candidates, typically they go the full distance. They actually go through the complete interview process and they almost sign up and then they back out. Because they are actually, if you look at it, they can be easily talked out of a change because they're used to a particular routine, they're used to a zone of comfort in their organization, 20 years, 25 years. And no, they don't change very easily. So, but it works for the organization which continues to retain them.
Sudarshan, the paradigm has changed. You are extending the past a little into the future to say, how can I use my past techniques to insulate me for the next few years? The paradigm has changed. The future is going to be a place where research is indicating, the Michigan University research indicates that people are going to be taking 35 career changes in their life. Now imagine this. Your design of the organizational employment cycle is a lifetime employment cycle where you believe a person is joining your company and goes out only when he is retiring. So the systems are designed for lifetime employment. Inventory is taking 35 turns. Who's at fault? So the importance is for you to redesign your requirement, identify only the key critical people in your organization who you need to tie down for long-term employment through all kinds of retention programs, huge offers, huge bonuses, wealth creation, whatever, for those handful of people, and then redesign your cycle for 4 or 5 years such that if they don't go out, actually you may end up pushing them to go out. And so create employability rather than non-employability for the external market.
Just add to what Adil was saying. I'm saying it's also an example of how older organizations, and Godrej is one, sort of needs to sort of relook at even employment cycles. So if you were to look at 5 years back or 6 years back, someone leaves Godrej, then it's a taboo. You can't even hire him back. But with shortening life cycles, I think we've come to this realization that some people will not be able to meet their aspirations of. And if they are good, I think it's perfectly fine for them to explore opportunities outside. When the time comes, we are perfectly willing to sort of take them in. And we've had examples of people who've probably done their third stint with us, and we still see value. And we know that they are possibly not the employees for lifetime, but how do we create roles and how do we create structures and assignments so that people do add value while they're with us?
Yeah.
Hi, Ashish from Kata Airways. We have touched upon many points like different employee stages have different mindsets, they have different aspirations, companies' goals and objectives are different. When we come to a reality, don't we feel a trust is more equivalent to and correlated to the engagement scenario? Because in the earlier companies when we take a period 10 years or 20 years prior, we see that people who are working in the factories, they were not so career-centric. Still, they were working with the companies for a longer period because the trust factor was there. When we come to as the generation Y, we can say we are more career-centric, more having a forward approach. But the trust factor has gone out somewhere. So don't we think that trust factor, if we build up, the engagement level will rise up?
See, there is a contradiction in what you are saying. Authenticity, if you don't mistake authenticity for trust. Because look at it this way. You are a great person, I need you. But if you start trusting that I will never tell you ever to leave my system when I don't find you necessary or suitable, is asking an enterprise to behave in a methodology which is artificial to its business needs. So trust is something you need to understand that I authentically believe what my enterprise tells me, but to trust things to say that even if the enterprise now doesn't need me, it will continue till I retire because I have given my youth to that enterprise, is to ask a business enterprise to be doing things which is not characteristics to its business challenges.
I just want to respond to that since it's getting close to dinner and I trust we'll get some dinner. Trust is equal to engagement and is equal to, trust is equal to empowerment is equal to engagement. I think that's the simple equation. It's very true. I mean, unless you trust, you will not empower. And if you empower, you can leverage engagement enormously. Young people, for example, if they get the pleasure of supervising a project which is very complex at the age of 28, 29, I mean, the kind of accomplishment that you see in their eyes is fantastic. So it's very, very true. You trust them, and of course you don't hang them for mistakes. They have to learn from the mistakes and so on.